introduce myself and I'll talk about the project. So I have been a photographer full-time for 17 years. My passion is portraiture. For 15 years I was a private commission photographer doing high-end black and white dog portraits all over the country. It was fascinating, and then it stopped being fascinating, and I turned all my attention to this body of work called Are You Okay? I'm not here to talk about legislation tonight. There is so much anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ legislation happening around the country, and I'm tired of talking about it. Tonight I'm just going to be an artist. So if you're here because you are desperate to learn about the laws, you're welcome to go to my website and I'll talk a little bit about it. But you know, what I will say is that we are seconds away from the dam of democracy breaking, and all of our lives are at stake. This project specifically focuses on trans and non-binary youth. I'm not going to, typically when I do this talk, which I do at educational institutions and other places, I talk a lot about the laws, but I'm just here to be an artist today. And you will see and hear from these kids, and they will kind of lead the way in teaching you about what's happening. But first I'll tell you about what Are You Okay is, and then a little bit about where this project came from. I get asked a lot why I'm doing this, and I started thinking a little bit more clearly about where this concept came from, where this style came from, and yeah, I'll tell you about that. So, Are You Okay is a 4-year project that I've been focused on solely. It's an archive, a photographic archive of trans and non-binary youth living in America with supportive families during this time of anti-trans legislation. It's about power and joy and struggle, and really the joy of survival and the strength of survival. I spent the past 4 years driving around the country by myself. I photographed 150 kids and families in more than half the states in the country. I think that was about 28,000 miles put on the truck. I really put my body and mind through hell to do this, but I was compelled to, one, tell a story that's not being told. As a photographer, that's always where my interest is to find the gaps, because if someone isn't telling a story, it needs to be uncovered. This story is not being told. I think people are too afraid to turn the lens on young people, and I love doing taboo things, and so I wanted to do that. But I also really just felt compelled to be on the same ground as these kids, literally bring my body and my camera and big voice recorder to all these states and be within feet of these kids over and over and over again. It's a bit of an obsessive archive, but that is, for me, a way of making an ethnographic social study of this community, of my community. So, yeah, I'll give you a little data, because I have to give data because I love data, to start this, and then we'll get some work. So this is a semi-accurate map of where I've been. New York, I have been to New York, that's not highlighted, but all those states that are pink are places where I have photographed. I started from Santa Fe, where I used to live, and again, I've been all over the country. I started originally just focusing on states, red states that had anti-trans legislation. This was starting 4 years ago. And then I realized that this legislation is a burning fire that is touching all corners of our country, and started photographing in as many states as I possibly could. So I'll just show you 2 more maps and then we'll look at art. But, every time I do this talk, I do a screen grab of the ACLU map. This is a wonderful map. You can go to my website and it'll link to it. The ACLU tracks anti-LGBTQ laws. This screen grab was taken just a few days ago. We currently have 479 anti-LGBTQ laws. When I did this talk a few months ago, a few weeks ago, it was less and less and less. This, I have nothing to say that hasn't been said before. This is a watershed moment. We are in a safer area of New England, but even in states like Massachusetts, Vermont, your neighboring state of New Hampshire, there are fascists and anti-trans people knocking down the doors and doing everything they can to pass legislation that would make it illegal for trans youth and adults to exist, period. So we are not safe. Nowhere is safe. And this is a screen grab from Erin in the Morning. Erin Reed is a wonderful trans journalist. She wrote the word for the back of my book. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes and we'll have time for Q&A in case you have any questions. Again, just so you can see what is happening, not everyone chooses, I will say, to obsessively travel around the country and see what's happening outside of our state. But if you just look, again, I'll talk about art in a second. This is the youth map, and the dark red is where it's illegal to get healthcare, basically. So we are in danger, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, so I started getting really curious about where this project came from and where the composition of this concept came from. And I just spent the past week really thinking about that. And my experience as a queer person, as a man of trans experience, as a Jew, is informed deeply by the generations that came before me. This is a portrait of my mom when she was just a little kid in New York, taken by my grandfather. He was a really wonderful photographer. He processed his own negatives in their kitchen and made his own prints. I found this not too long ago. This was, again, in New York. My mom, I don't know, probably just like 2, right after they got off the boat from Germany, right after my grandparents survived the Holocaust and my mom was born, and then they came over on the boat. And when I found this portrait, I just think it's, I mean, I could talk all night about this, but I won't, but there's something so intriguing. I used to photograph dogs. Dogs are such a conduit vehicle for human connection. There's such innocence in this child's posture, who happens to be my mother, but what really grabs me is the subjects in the corner and how my grandfather, intentionally or not, has cut off their faces. It's a headless portrait. And I'll show you in a minute sort of how this progressed, but for me, it is just so perfectly created. I think about why did this person who survived such horrors, why was he able to make this image? I looked at it over and over again, and I wonder what he was seeing. I wonder what he was including and not including. I wonder if there was something that he was using photography in the way I use it to but to explicitly express a sort of heartache that I don't really have words for. And the composition is how that's created. For me, this is such a perfect portrait. And from here, this is a portrait I made in college when I was really curious about headless portraits. I had not seen that portrait my grandfather made until years later. So that first portrait was made, 60 years ago? This is about 25 years ago. This is a good friend of mine. This is out in the cornfields of Amherst when I was in college, just starting to use Polaroids and use the tool of photography to interact with and tell stories about my community. I can't remember why I was so drawn to not showing people's faces, but in the same way, that ratio of showing the bottom of the chin and centering the subject, and really thoughtfully doing it, as imperfect as this is, really, when I saw this and then I looked at that image of my mother, I think that there is something that is happening in this body of work that may have been informed by the struggle to talk about grief and loss, parents, children, and hiding our identities. When I was just starting this work, this sort of very initial series, I wanted to photograph my community of trans people, but I didn't want them to be exposed. And so I just got really intrigued by anonymizing us. And I think, again, 25 years later, well, pause. This is my old job. I photographed dogs, but even when I was doing this career, I've always been fascinated by just subtracting people's faces and abstracting their bodies in a way to articulate intimacy that is unusual and outside the box. This is actually the very first dog portrait I ever did. Again, these are all private commissions. I used to use a Hasselblad, which is, medium format, black and white film, autofocus, manual focus, manual, everything. And for me, this was the very first client I ever had. I fell in love with this portrait. It was a slight accident, but again, we're not seeing this dog's face. The focus hits right kind of in the middle of this depth of field, and it's fascinating to me. And I was told that I couldn't make work like that, which is why I started making work of it. So, anyways, all of that kind of leads us to this project. And it felt really nice to kind of go back and think about why I decided to really lean into this kind of composition. So I'm always, curious about pushing limits of the frame. I think a strong portrait says much more about the artist than it does about the subject. And for me, I think when I think about how my grandfather's image has informed kind of my work and vice versa, I think that maybe I just don't have the ability to fully see everyone in this sphere. And so kind of removing the parental figures and really focusing on the child was all that I could see, whether I pulled my camera back or not. I was just focused on that kid. This was the very first portrait I made for Are You OK? This is in Albuquerque. This is a test shoot. I wasn't exactly sure how it would turn out. But I worked for a while thinking about the composition, thinking about how I wanted to create tension, how I wanted to say visually that the only way to have a living trans child is to support them. And I had to think about how do I articulate that visually. And that concept of headless family members came to me. I was driving down to Albuquerque from Santa Fe, which is less than an hour drive. There's literally no turns, you just drive straight through the desert. And I knew I had 2 kids signed up this very first session. I had a concept of how I wanted to place everybody. I knew I had these 2 posing chairs, which you'll see through the images. I knew that I wanted the kids to be at a 3/4 angle. I knew how I wanted everything to go, but I didn't really know how to get that kid to connect with me deeply. And I had this idea while I was driving down, somehow, this idea came to me, to do a really short meditation with the kids. I do not meditate. I cannot. I want to say I'm not interested. I am interested, but I cannot do it. However, this idea came to me that if I invited this kid in front of his parents to connect with me as a member of the trans community, I do not use the word trans for myself, but I am a man of trans experience, and let these kids and families know that very clearly. I tell them that it's radical for us to tell our own stories. That no one else should be telling our story right now, at all. Anyways, I had this idea to take 5 deep breaths with the kids. literally driving, 5 minutes away from the parking lot, I had that idea, and I just simply invited Samuel to do that with me. The way I photograph is I have a stool that goes up and down, and I make sure that I put myself at the same eye level as my subject. And I invited him to just take 5 deep breaths with me, and to sort of come into himself and psychically project himself. And I did it with him. So I've done this 150 times, over and over and over, all these kids. And this was the first frame, and it was exactly what I wanted, and I did not change anything for 4 years. There's intimacy, there's trust. I'll talk a little bit more about how I continue now. How I come to this kind of intimate connection. So I have been, again, all over the country. It takes an immense amount of time, many months and hours at my computer to plan these trips and to find the families. What I'll do is, this was a trip, I think, to the Midwest that I did early on. And I will research, okay, I'm going to Oklahoma, are there any queer youth groups? Are there any PFLAGs? Are there any trans organizations that I can reach out to tell them I'm driving through your city? I would choose a city that I thought would be accessible. I'll be there for 1 day only at a specific time. Are you willing to share this information with your community? And it took a lot, many emails and cold calls and Zoom calls with these groups to build trust. And most of the time people wouldn't call me back because there's a lot of gatekeeping, as there should be. No one should be getting access to these families now, that's for sure. But even 4 years ago, understandably, this was outside of a very small queer center. I will use quotation marks. This was in Oklahoma, not too far from, this is in Enid, not far from where Nex was murdered. These kids are still living there. This kid, if you go, I'm pretty sure Camden is in the book or on the website, but you'll hear them talk about being afraid to use the bathroom. And this was a year or two before Nex was murdered. So this is happening everywhere, and all of our lives are in danger. All that to say is, I found this queer center. They were kind enough to have a phone call with me. I gave them the information, and what happens is that I will, these families or these kids, if they're over 18, they can contact me themselves. If they're under 18, they have to, work with their parents. They'll reach out to me and they'll say, I hear you're going through Miami, I want to sign up for a session. And they'll get an email that has a lot of information. Because trust building, no matter what I'm doing, is really my first concern, whether I'm photographing a friend, whether it's a dog commission, or whether it's doing something with such high stakes and such public exposure like Are You Okay? But they'll get an email from me that says, this is who I am, I'm a part of the community, here's what I've done, here's where you can find me online, this is what I'm going to do with the project, here are the pros and cons in getting involved in such a public-facing project. Here's where the work may get used. So these kids know exactly why they're showing up. I tell them that this is art as activism, this is not, just a glamour shot. So the kids know, and they get that email 3 times because I'm very thorough. And by the time they get there, I meet them face to face. I tell them again, I go through all the steps again, verbally, to give them one more chance to sort of say yes or no. In the 4 years that I've been on the road photographing, I think there was maybe 2 kids who were like, actually, I think I changed my mind. And I was like, great. I will take your photo and give it to you, and it will be part of the project. Thank you. I think that is, again, I think of the stories that we see, the visual stories that we see in media, and even other art projects, and we use in quotations. Think of articles in the New York Times or, you know, people talking on TV. The images that they are using are not these, thankfully, don't steal my work, and also they're not interested in this. They want an image of a sad, unloved, lonely-looking trans child because that's what they believe people are experiencing. This is an antidote to that. I interviewed everyone on this project, and I will play for you a couple short little excerpts, and this is one of my favorites.
I think any queer trans person who's like actively paying attention to what's going on in the country right now can't help but like feel the impact of it, you know? It's just every law that gets passed, just another sort of like, hey, just so you know, you're still not welcome in the society. I just have a gut feeling that one way or another we're still going to be able to come out on top. Queer resilience is strong as hell. I think when you get to a level of marginalization and queerness, you can't hold your tongue anymore. You can't just kind of sit back and watch it happen. But I think visibility is an incredibly powerful tool, especially right now.
Really, all I had to do was show up as a community member, as an adult. Accidentally, I was possibility modeling that you can live to age 43 if you're lucky, and look them in the eye and ask them a question. And I can't say anything more eloquently than these kids can. One thing that I love about this kind of exhibit is there are QR codes under each of the portraits that lead to a 2-minute audio clip. And I've seen people standing in front of each of these portraits for 2 minutes listening to the audio on their phones. And having to stare, not having to, but just choosing to stare at the images, which as a photographer is thrilling. I want someone to spend 2, 5, 10 minutes looking at every corner of the frame because that's what I look at. It's incredibly all intentional. And I will point out one of my favorite details, and this is in Miami, outside of a queer center, and right next to them was an abandoned tile factory or tile shop of some sort. And they had this really cool parking lot that they shared, and their building was like really colorful and really cool looking. And at the corner, I was like, give me the dirty corner with the white concrete and all the dirt. That's where I'm comfortable photographing. But you can see, in all of these portraits, I'm really balancing a moment of sort of spectacular cleanliness between me and the sitter and their people, with the dirt and grime that might be found outside. I was photographing outside because at the beginning COVID was happening, and it's still happening. I'm a natural light photographer, and I most importantly wanted to sort of incorporate this feeling of, we're on the run, we're meeting behind a building. It's dangerous because it was dangerous for all of us. But you can see under the chairs a piece of tile. That was the only thing I moved because it was uneven and the chair was rocking, and that neurotically made me upset. So I found the perfect piece of tile. And again, I just, this is this balance of cleanliness and poise and connection with sort of the dirt and chaos. For me, that brings me so much joy. This is Kai. I photographed in New Hampshire probably about 2 years ago. Gosh. Again, this was behind the building of a theater. This was on the last large road trip I did for this project, which is a month on the road. I started in Santa Fe, drove to Florida, and then went all the way up the coast to New Hampshire, around to Chicago and back, and that was a month on the road, which was grueling. And I found this great theater in Portland, Portsmouth, and they're like, oh, we can photograph in front, there's all these cool things, and I was like, no, let's be behind the building so no one sees us. And there's this beautiful, what I think is beautiful, concrete, slightly algaed wall. It was a bright day, it was incredibly hot, there was this very loud train that was driving very slowly back and forth. But for me, this doesn't get any better. You know, there's this sort of combat between the high-key, white on white, and then this kid's beautiful shirt popping out. They had this beautiful conversation with their mother about, yeah, finding their place, where they feel safe in their family, where they feel safe in the state of New Hampshire. And this was, again, 2 years ago, and things have only gotten worse. But so I published this first book. I am hoping to do a second volume, which would include more of the work. This just has 30 portraits, it's 150. This interview, which may be in the next book, the very end, Kai talks about how they don't think, in the long run, that the politicians doing this harmful work really have harmful intent. They're just miseducated. And his mom, who is incredibly kind, interrupted him and said, "That seems like you're being too nice. I think there is harm being done." And it's really interesting to see sort of, you know, I am not it gets better kind of person. I don't really believe in that sort of sugar-coated slogan. But it's pretty beautiful to hear these kids, whether he still feels this or not, I don't know, see himself being hunted by the government, you know, rejected by some of his family, and still have some love inside of him to think that the politicians just need to be educated. And I want to say that that is correct. I don't know. There is a lot of miseducation, but it's interesting just to sort of see those conversations between an adult's perspective and a kid's perspective. And again, you know, when you just see a portrait of a lonely trans child that's being blasted all over the news, you don't get the intricacies of what they're experiencing. This is one of my favorite portraits. Actually, I'm wearing my rainbow socks. You can't really see them, but that Cam's mom knit for me. His mom is a sock knitter. She's like really, really, really into it. And a question I get fairly often is, did anything surprise me? Or was I surprised by anything in this project? And I always say no. It's like I knew exactly what these kids were going to say, and I knew exactly how horrific it was going to be. But what did surprise me was the kindness that these parents showed me. People knit me socks. Cam's mom, who I keep in touch with, I keep in touch with a lot of the parents and kids. She showed up, never having met me, with this big bag of oatmeal chocolate chip cookies or something that her husband's mom made, who is this very Christian woman, and it took her a minute to kind of catch on to support Cam, but it was the Midwest, and they're just like, this is what you do for strangers, you make them cookies. I had parents bring me food. I had parents slip cash into my camera case without me looking, you know, like, here's some gas money for the road. I had parents and kids, including this family, bring me stickers for my camera case, which is now covered in trans-affirming stickers, and it's scary to bring that across country, but I try and mess with me. We'll see what happens. Hasn't happened yet. I will, let's see. I want to keep an eye on time. I'm not going to play you Cam's interview, but you can hear that on the website. This is Helena, who I photographed in Richmond. Gosh, I love this portrait so much. Some kids were more articulate and sort of open than others, obviously. Helena's dad on this side, they actually were camping, and they left their camping trip to come to the photo session. So Helena's dad is also a man of trans experience, and gosh, her parents just spoke so eloquently about the dangers of being trans in America, of having layers of marginalization in America. So many of these kids talk about leaving the country. Even Cam, who is 8, you can hear his interview, it's very endearing, but he says, you know, if these laws come here, will we move? And his mom says, we'll go anywhere you want. And he says, can we go to Antarctica? And she says, yes. I heard you and listen to it. But Helena also was just, you know, very open about how she's ready to leave. There's, you know, this false promise of American freedom is incredibly false. This is one of my favorites. I don't usually share diptychs, but this is a couple that I met in St. Pete. This was the very first session I did on this the start of the last big trip. It doesn't get better than this for me. As I was photographing in this kind of garden space, one of the parents that had signed up for a session, sometimes I have to ask parents, like, I cannot find a public place for us to photograph. Do you have any suggestions? And this mom was a therapist, and this was sort of behind her office, and that light was just gorgeous. And these kids are 19 and 20 and just really love each other. And it was so beautiful and intimate. And they asked if they could, sort of do this together. And of course I said yes. And you can tell when a sitter is comfortable, and you can tell when a person is comfortable with somebody. It's not hard to pick up on those cues. And I just see, we do our meditation, we do our breathing exercise, and I just see my sitters just sort of drop into their bodies and relax. And as a photographer, as a portrait photographer, that is the biggest compliment. And that's when the moment happens. And I just love this. This is another diptych. These guys are best friends. This was in Laramie, Wyoming. This was on a big Midwest trip I did. When I planned that trip, the first location that I coordinated around was Laramie. As a kid who grew up in the 90s, Matthew Shepard's murder really affected me. And it put fear in me as a young queer kid. And I'd never been to Laramie, and it is hard to get to. And there was a snowstorm, I had to go over this mountain pass. They said, do not drive. I was like, I'm not gonna miss this shoot. And so I drove. There was no cell reception, there was whiteout snow. And I risked it to get to this beautiful session. And I only had 2 kids show up in Laramie, understandably. Wyoming is an incredibly tough state. It's only gotten tougher. This I found after an obsessive amount of research, trying to figure out where I could photograph, like what safe space outside that has a kind of quiet nook. And I found this, I want to say it's like 40s, 50s era, what do you call it? Amphitheater in the middle of a park. And this great concrete floor. It was white. It almost looked like what you would see in a studio. And Ash, on this side, showed up first. They carpooled from a very small town in Wyoming. I forget what it's called. And Ash's dad, you can't really see, but he's a big guy. And he has sort of big dad energy. And, I meet a lot of parents, and I have to be kind and open and vulnerable and charming and make them comfortable with me. Even though they've had many emails, sometimes not all the parents read all the emails, so they're not charmed by the communication that I've done ahead of time. But he really strolled up hard, and in a protective way, which I respected. And it's thrilling for me to work under pressure, and I want to say disarm this person, but I had to show myself to him. And I looked him in the eye and shook his hand and let him hear the introduction that I would give all the kids. And the second he heard that I was part of the community, he relaxed and was a totally different person. Mike, there's many kids that I met on the road that I saw myself in tremendously. He's 10, and he did not talk to me, which is fair, because he's a young kid. But the interview was really wonderful, and I will say that I get a lot of emails from the parents just to give me updates. And I'll just read you these 2 that I got from Mike and Ash the past month. So Mike's mom said, I will post these photos on social media here and there. Mike's mom said, I just saw the post you made about my son Mike. I was absolutely moved to tears. He has come so far since this picture. He said it really shows that things can get better. I'm forever grateful for this opportunity, and thank you for all you're doing to tell real people's stories. And I never thought I would get emails like that. Ash, who's now in college, sent me, they're slightly long-winded, but I'll read you, I'll try and shorten this. So they said, hey, this is Ash. You took my photo while you were here in Wyoming. I think the kids think that I may have forgotten that I met them and like spent my life thinking about them since we met. It's very endearing. I said, I just wanted to reach out and thank you. To be honest, I almost forgot I hadn't done this with you until I opened my Facebook and looked through all of your posts and seen all the things you've done since I last saw you. I feel like I saw it for a reason, though. With everything that's happening in the world with LGBTQIA rights, I have been scared, like I was when you first interviewed me. But looking through all these interviews that you've been able to do with all these people warms my heart and reminds me how far I've come myself. And now in college, studying accounting and moving forward with my life with confidence. I'm so thankful for people like you that show what we as LGBTQIA+ people have to go through, not only to shine a light on it, but to open the door for people like us to see that they're not alone, and there's a future for them in whatever they want to do. I know this is a long message, but this is what I needed to hear. Thank you. It's an incredible gift I print out all of these letters, and I have them all in a folder from the past 4 years. It's a really powerful reminder for me about why I'm doing this work. I want to make sure I have time for Q&A. I'm not going to play you this audio, although this I think is one of the most powerful interviews. I encourage you, it's actually behind this wall, so you can't see it, but it's also on my website. I have cards, you can go find it. Yeah, I'll just tell you that. You should listen to it. I won't tell you. Well, I was going to give you a warning, but the warning's gone. Also, the photo is right there. Usually before I show this image, I do give people a little bit of a warning, but here we are. So this is Carolyn, who I photographed in St. Pete. And this, I think, is really the hardest image, obviously, of this project. I knew when I started that I would have at least one empty chair. I didn't know that, I didn't know when that would happen. I didn't know how I was going to deal with it, but I sort of asked the universe to bring me a family like this. Not because I want to re-traumatize us or traumatize them, but because people need to know what happens when you don't support your kid. And even when you support your kid, like Carolyn, what happens, what the risks are. Kids are dying no matter how loved they are. Thankfully, Nova was okay. I like to say okay, but not okay. A day or two before our session, she had a mental break and was admitted to the hospital, which is where she was when this was taken. And her mom told me that she called Nova to see, like, do you still want me to do this session? Do you want me to do it with an empty chair? And Nova said, yes, please show up, please show people what happens. And that's how this image was made. This is the second to last portrait in the book, and it's a really powerful interview. The reality is, it is incredibly hard to survive as a trans child or an adult without family support. Again, I'm not going to go over the data or in the laws like I usually do, but it's hard. It's going to be real hard for these kids to keep moving through the world, even if they have support like all of these families. And, loving your child is life-saving work. Loving a child or adult in the community is life-saving work. So we all have a responsibility. You can figure out how to get involved. I'm not going to go over my allyship directives because that's not what I'm doing today. Okay, I'll end on one of my favorites, and I'll play Steve's interview. This is Steve. Gosh, I love ending on Steve. I met Steve in Louisville. He was the only kid who came to my session in Louisville. Like, he's wearing 2 different socks. He's wearing this amazing tie-dye. You can see his mom and his dad. I love his dad's beard that was flowing in the wind. He had a big dip of tobacco in his mouth. And his brother, these young siblings love their trans siblings, and they show up, and they weren't forced to do it. I'll play you Steve's audio. It's, and I'll give you his update.
It's like they're choking the community, trying to squeeze out people who are NB, transgender fluid, anything like that. When I first heard about it, it definitely affected my mental state a bit, but I've stood my ground and stayed as strong as I can. I have a supportive family, a supportive group of friends online. I'm proud of myself. I'm not going to be shot down by others' opinions. My voice is louder than theirs.
So this is totally, they've always been this confident person, and we want to continue encouraging that because they are amazing. I think there's a lot of anxiety for the safety because we care. And we only want the best for the children, no matter what they identify or who they feel they are. You are the difference maker in their lives. You are their first safe place, and sometimes you're their only safe place. So I hope you continue to give them the love and support that they need, because when they flourish, it makes everyone's lives better. I know Steve didn't get to share with you this, but they start their hormone journey in August. We meet with a therapist, and then in September we evaluate. So they're very excited for that.
It feels empowering getting to express my opinion freely. In at least this country, we're allowed to do that. Some people are going to try to suppress it, and that's not okay. Don't give up. You got this. You don't let others bring you down.
If you're struggling to find your community, you just haven't met Steve yet.
As dark and heavy as this is, there's a lot of laughter with these kids, and it's a good reminder for me to just, let these kids bring joy into my life. I will give you a short update on Steve, and then I'll open up to questions. Steve's mom, like a lot of his parents, just email me updates. It's like, I don't like kids. I don't want children ever in my life. I actually clearly love children and love getting these updates. Steve's mom said that shortly after this, he met another young trans non-binary kid in Florida online. I don't know. Their parents, I'm sure, made sure it was fine. I don't know how parenting works. But eventually, the parents planned a trip. And the kids got to meet in person, I think in Louisville. And I won't read you the email, it's too long. But she just described this moment where the kids, they met at a coffee shop in like a movie. The kids saw each other and ran to each other and hugged. Everyone at the coffee shop started clapping. And, he's doing okay. And survival is radical. And that's what I tell the kids. And on this is a small section of the 150 portraits that I've done all over the country. And that's where I'm going. I'm happy to open up to questions, and I appreciate you guys coming out and listening. So, any thoughts or questions? Or sure. Yes?
Have you been approached by PBS or anybody like that in terms of documentary? I mean, this just screams for a follow-up, 5, 10, 15 years, whatever. But I think it would be really fascinating.
I have not been approached by PBS, although I've done a lot of media around this. I have been approached by some people asking if I will continue traveling or if I would do a 5-year follow-up, but there's no guarantee that I'll be around in 5 years or will be here in 5 years. There's no guarantee that these kids will be around alive for me to photograph, so I won't ask them. And I'm not going to put myself through any more traveling. I think, but it's a great question. I think the onus is now on our allies to do that work. So that torch is there to be picked up. But PBS wants to call me.
Oh no, I'm older than you are.
Yes. But thank you for that question. Anybody else?
Any other comments, questions, reflections?
Yeah, I guess reflection. Curiously, I've just been, following this place and looking at the website, and you came up with this wonderful project. and maybe I'll come down. And the punchline for me this evening, before I came down, was a sudden feeling of, am I safe?
It's real. I think about it every time I speak publicly, and to be honest, this may be one of my last talks because it is not safe.
So you understand what I'm saying, and it really it just bubbled up, and like a true threat, and I started living in that space before I got down here, managing the fight or flight possibilities and how I would react. And it was a moment of real powerful empathy on one level, but also self-preservation on the other. And so I'm just grateful to be down here to have such a full experience. And I can say much more about the beauty of the photographs and the way you played it. There was one where you put the tile under there. Take a peek. There's a beautiful little sprout coming up on one of the legs of the chair.
I know it well.
Okay. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, I left it as is. But it's a powerful comment, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I have canceled future talks in big places in New York because it's not worth my mental sanity, which is quite low at the moment. It is not safe. This is a wonderful, amazing, beautiful gallery, but I always have my eye on the door. And driving on the road feels safer to me being in my truck than doing public talks, especially as the days to come. So. Yes?
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be odd in this, but did any of your subjects indicate in any way something to which they would credit their ability to make these decisions? My generation, making a decision like that would have been next to impossible.
What decision are you referring to?
Just in terms of gender identification, being different than what you might have been born with. Other than Christine Jorgensen, we didn't have anybody.
Well, you did have people, they just weren't.
Yes,
speaking
right.
publicly.
Yeah. So I just wondered if there was any event or any social dynamic that they might have attributed
To surviving?
to surviving, to make,
Survival's not a choice. You just do it. It's not a choice. It's not a choice to be what gender you are. You just are your gender. These kids, if you read the interviews or listen to them, they will speak about their experience, but I never ask them how they are who they are. So, I can't answer that, and I don't think it necessarily needs to be answered. People just exist. This is a way of existing, just like you're existing. There's nothing different. So, yes, sorry. Yeah, Dina, go ahead, and then I'll call you.
As I continue to scan the pictures around the room, I'm not a photographer, I'm not an artist, and I just look at those hands. Every picture, the hands-on, and the deep, profound message that I get from the hands, and maybe you could just speak to this, is the communication to every one of these kids. You are not alone. Maybe you've spoken about that feeling, but it's right there for me in the hands. They're just so beautiful to look at, and I'm not sure I quite followed when you were saying about not having people's heads, sort of the absent presence or something.
Well, I'm trying to anonymize the families, the parents, and say that the kids' experience is the most important. But as a portrait photographer, even when I was photographing dogs and doing anything, I am so fascinated by, intimacy in general. As a
Yeah.
photographer, I get to be a voyeur and stare at people's intimacy
Uh-huh.
all day long, which maybe kind of similar to your job. So I don't know how this idea came to me. I think maybe that first portrait of Samuel, maybe a parent just organically did that. But what I did moving forward was invite, once everyone was where they were supposed to be, I invited parents, I said, I invite you to have one point of contact between parents and kid. And that's all that I said, and I let them kind of figure out what that meant. And for me, it is really that it's I am steadfast in my support. This is my visual representation to the greater world that I love my child and I have their back.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some, I always tell the kids, if you don't want your parents to touch you, it's your prerogative. Sometimes parents have cooties and some kids are like, don't touch me. But it was very rare, but I wanted to give them that choice.
Yeah.
And I just think we need more displays of parents being unwavering in their support. And I use that touch as a tool. So, visual. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I really appreciate that you told us sort of how you were experimenting with headless portraits before you got to this, because I find it fascinating the way that an artist develops into their storytelling. I was curious along those lines, did you find that more times than not your first frame was the frame? Yeah.
Always.
Always?
I don't say that from ego, but just
No.
in practice, just about always.
Yeah, I'm also a portrait photographer, and I find that a lot of times the more you work something, the more it becomes like a performance, and
Yes.
you can see it in their eyes.
That's exactly right.
And so I was curious if you found your first frame
Yeah,
was like.
it's thrilling. It's just absolutely thrilling for me there's so much chaos, and I love maybe not in my daily life, but when I'm working, I want to be surrounded by chaos and be in a pressure cooker, because that makes me calm, And before I actually met these kids, there were so many emails. I was training them. I come from kind of a dog training background, so it's similar. I was training them to do what I wanted them to do exactly when they showed up. By the way I was communicating, by the words that I was using on the website, etc. And so the kids they weren't actually going to my website. The kids have their websites. I don't know. They didn't even know what it was. But they were bringing that same energy because they knew why they were showing up. They knew this was dangerous, this was activism. And the way that I got this moment, aside from that meditation, was, I used my body as the model. And kind of psychically, I tell them what to do. So I'm sitting the same way that they're sitting. I'm sort of holding myself the same way. I talk like this level.
Yeah.
So that they meet me in that space before, and it's already there.
Yeah.
And once my camera is there, the moment is there. Literally, this portrait takes like 2 minutes.
And it says so much. It's really a beautiful
Yeah.
piece of work.
Appreciate it. It's a really thrilling process to do over and over. It's very satisfying. And then, of course, I shoot a little bit more, maybe move around a little bit, but this is when we meet. This is like, not when we meet, but like 2 minutes after we've met and they've sat down. If I can get someone to be in this vulnerable, I didn't tell Haven what to do with their cane. I was sort of posing myself. And in my mind, I was like, this is what I want you to do. Somehow that gets translated, I cannot tell you how. And they're meeting the energy that I'm giving off.
Yeah, they're bringing their expression too, which
Yeah.
seems to be very unique and intimate.
Yeah, it's thrilling. I'm kind of addicted to that experience of getting someone to be vulnerable with me. It's a weird job, but I love it. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's the hand and everything that is happening below the head, because we're so used to immediately going to a face rather than the lower body, or that and especially the idea of cradling or being there for a person is in the way they hold the body or hold the person with their hands. So I feel both the person holding themselves with their arms and/or cradling your child is a really powerful expression, and I love that. I also wondered about the process with VPI, which to me was, I give VPI,
VCP.
VIP, is that, what is it?
VCP.
VCP, so much credit and courage as a gallery to exhibit something so powerful and so political in its own way. And so, a couple of questions. First, about that process, and secondly, this is a political exhibit, an art exhibit, a political art exhibit, and as you put it together, I wonder what you think of it as.
I do not think it is political. These are humans that have been politicized, and it's not their fault. They didn't choose to be political. I'm an artist. I have not chosen to be a political change maker. I'm just simply a documentarian. So I do not believe it is political. It is our government's fault. It is, transphobic people's fault that medical care and rights and existence and breathing air and being loved and living and existing is political, because it is not political for every human being, and these are all human beings. So I do not believe it's political. I do believe that it's activism, because we are actively making change and speaking to what's happening. And I can't speak for Josh, who's been a wonderful collaborator, but yeah, I will tell you that many galleries will not put this work up. Many schools will not pay me to come speak. Many huge companies, this money is gone. They don't want us talking about this, and it's only getting worse. And that's why it should be shown more.
So Josh, why then?
You can answer or not.
I mean, curatorially, I'm interested in strong work. I think the work speaks pretty clearly and pretty cohesively and pretty consistently in a powerful manner. I am in the variety of exhibits that we do over the course of the year, whether it's the print gallery or the main gallery, group shows or solo exhibitions, try to represent as broad a diversity of artists as well as subject matter. And Jesse had submitted a proposal, and it was a pretty easy yes for me. So.
Good answer, Josh. Yes, Joel.
Firstly, a reflection, I just wanted to share that I'm just sitting with feeling so intensely moved by how palpable it is, how much it took for these kids to get to you, and how much it took for you to get to these kids, and the incredible bravery and generosity of bringing you and them to us, and to us to you and them. And so just thank you. And I notice in a lot of the portraits, there are so many shirts or buttons with, text and graphics and messages. Where, I imagine these kids and their parents and caregivers dressed up, knowing that they were going to be seen and wanting to convey something. And I'm just curious if there are any sort of moments that you remember in particular of one of the kids, telling you or sharing with you, what they brought with them, what they wore, what they were showing, what they wanted to be seen.
Yeah, I appreciate that reflection. And those details for me are just thrilling, which is why it's really wonderful to see people, listen to the audio and have to stare at the details, because I just get lost. Details are incredibly exciting to me. Things that may seem subtle, to me are oh my God, whether you chose this or not, it is perfect. I always I told the kids, just show up as your most empowered self, be who you are, whatever you want to wear is great. I'll give you two examples. One, the big portrait of Sunny behind you, that was one of the first portraits they did. That was in Texas. Sunny is amazing. She's a roller derby girl. She's badass. Her and her kid, her brother were just running around punching each other, and it was really awesome. But this family is a real Southern family, The mom showed up, she had rainbow stripes in her hair, which I was sad to not show. And the dad, who was a real Southern man, who cried, and I love when dads cry, he dyed his wife's hair, you know, and they showed up and they're like, we brought some shirts, can we wear the shirts? And I was like, oh, what are you gonna pull out? But they pulled out these shirts, they're the trans flag in the Texas state that they made. The mom made those. And you know, it matches Sonny's dress thing, and it was perfect. And they made that decision. And I love that we can't see all of it, but we see enough. This portrait of Haven just wore what Haven wears. I love Haven. And their mom, you can see, has a, I think, Mama Bear's shirt. Mama Bear's and Free Mama Hugs, these enormous organizations. And she has like 5,000 buttons on, and she's a little extra. She comes to pretty much everything I do. She's wonderful. One of the families that have adopted me. And when I'm editing, you know, I edit how I would edit in darker, which is simply contrast, tone. I'm not doing any wacky stuff. But I make sure when there are buttons that if I can make them pop a tiny bit, I will, because those are really important details. There's one portrait, I don't think it's here. I don't know where it is. Maybe it's in the book. I don't remember what's in the book. But yeah, another kid that brought his skateboard, and he has a jacket, all these pins, and his skateboard is covered in stickers, and we were photographing in South Dakota. It was freezing, even though it was spring, and this parking lot of a church. And his dad, he got out, and his dad opened the trunk, and he just gave me a skateboard. He's like, yeah, skateboard around and with the church. And that became, oh, he's in the corner. Yeah, I forgot what I did. Thank you. Yeah, that's one of my favorites too. But those details just say so much about the person, whether they're subconscious choices or they're more conscious. Yeah. That's big.
And snakes.
And snakes, oh my goodness.
Dogs.
Yeah, so the portrait of Keel, sweatshirt thing. A lot of the families Googled me, as they should. I think you should Google anyone you're going to meet that's a stranger, for any reason. And all of them, I think, saw that I used to photograph dogs, so there were some dogs. Aura brought their dog, and there was a bunch of dogs. But Keel, this was in this beautiful campus in Durham. It was very fancy. I had to get all his permissions to photograph there. And the mom called, and she was like, we're bringing our dog. I'm like, that's fine. And then they're like, we're bringing our steak, and I didn't want to say no. I don't like steaks. I'm not interested in steaks. And I don't know. It was perfect. It was perfect. You can see the dog's paws resting gently on Keel's shoulder. And they were like, do you want to pet the steak? And I said, no, thank you. And then the security guards were like, what are you doing? Put the steak back in its Tupperware. So yeah, you never know what's going to happen. But the only thing.
Do the parents know that their faces will only be, you know, that basically they won't be identifiable?
They did. I made it very clear in the emails. Not everyone read everything. Sometimes the parents were like, well, why? You know, and I was like, this is how it is. Thank you for being here. But they did know. And I also told them again in person. In the interviews, you hear the parents speaking in their written, so they're really important. But the parents knew. The parents were like, this is about my child. I'm here for my child. Ignore me. And I appreciate that they did their homework. So, any other questions? Yeah.
I have so many thoughts, so I wasn't sure exactly which question or like what to say. I'm like really, it's really moving, and it's really like, I just hope that everyone understands like what a risk these families are taking, because things are going in a very dangerous direction, and this is now archival. This is like in the world. This is a testament that like people can find people in these portraits, so they're making a bet that that the empathy and understanding they get from you all is worth the risk of putting themselves out there where, people with harmful intent, and also it's interesting that you brought up the Holocaust in the beginning of your intro, because I often think about sort of the parallels between the scapegoating of trans people by politicians and the early stages of fascism in Germany. There's a lot of parallels. And if I were to, somebody already brought up the contact between a hand on the shoulder of the kids, and I really like that. And one of the points of contact that I was most moved by was the youths who were in each other's portraits, touching each other for some reason. That just especially moved me. Is that because they don't have supportive families, or is it? What's the story behind that sort of variance in the general structure of these portraits?
Yeah, so I made sure everyone knew that if they were under 18, they had to come with a parent. To sign a model release, I made sure everyone knew there was going to be a model release, that what to expect, X, Y, and Z. There were some kids who had parents that were separated, and I made sure legally that both parents had to sign, and sometimes that was a barrier. But because I wanted to make sure that the kids were protected, and that I was protected. But for kids over 18, for young people over 18, they were allowed to bring their chosen family or whoever they wanted. And there were certainly, some of the older young people, like JP, who was over there, he brought chosen family. And the couple that I photographed from Florida, they, I can't remember if they had supportive parents, but I do think it's really powerful too, to see, either an inference or actually just showing our chosen family. And, I don't know if there was even a parallel to fascism. We are already there. It's already existing.
Right.
These kids are
yeah.
dying.
But do you? I mean, do you see parallels just in the machine? I don't know if you've heard the podcast, the Anti-Trans Hate Machine, but how they sort of disguise this reactionary movement as a grassroots thing, but really it's totally orchestrated nationally. It does kind of there. You don't see some parallels with sort of other fascist times and?
Oh no, I completely do, 100%. I just say it's not even a parallel, it's just we are repeating. We are already in the middle of the repetition, for sure. And a lot of these kids, in their interviews speak about, they're all speaking about the laws, whether they're 8 or 24. And they're scared, and they know exactly what's happening, and they're also choosing to make themselves vulnerable. And I still wonder, if I'll ever get an email from a participant saying, please take me off. I've never received that, not once. I've only received emails genuinely saying thank you. And that's surprising to me.
Yeah.
That these kids know, they think so hard about what they're doing, and they know why they're showing up. They're making a sacrifice to make change. So, Matt, go ahead.
I was going to state, I think it's just incredibly beautiful to facilitate an archive for people that often are erased And I think the most beautiful thing that I noticed throughout the detail, the punctum, if you will, that really struck me is in the photograph in the corner. In the glasses, there's a reflection of you taking the photo.
I've never noticed that.
Yeah.
Good detail, good eyes.
Yeah, that really feels like, you know, including yourself within the image, it being like both a portrait and a self-portrait, that significance to me is incredible. And I know you're having to approach this from a very scientific kind of lens in order to get it out there, in order to really validate it. And I just wanted to commend you, and thank you.
Appreciate that. It's now I want to look. But I will say, all portraits are self-portraits. These, you know, I have asked these kids to tell my story for me, not directly, but in some of the audio interviews, you can hear me talking to the kids, and I've taken out most of them. But yes, I'm very present, and I appreciate you doing that. So I don't know how much more time we have, so I don't want to. Josh, you're the boss, so.
Chris, did you have a question?
A comment. So many things to say, but just one thing I wanted to mention that I'm really aware of, and I keep going to that this one right here, this portrait right here. I think your idea to not show the family's heads was brilliant, and all of the ways you structured it with the hands and focusing on the kid, I think all of that was amazingly well. But in this portrait, you see just the mom's mouth, and to me, I'm so glad I get that little glimpse, because in that little tiny bit of expression, I feel like I read the whole thing of all of these families, and it's just like resolute love, pure and simple, straight up. This is my kid. This is our family. This is who we are. And I'm so glad for that little piece of that. And it feels like, you know, at some point in the future, hopefully, we could see a show like this and just think, oh, family portraits. Nothing more. People who love their kids. So thank you. It's just so powerful.
I appreciate that. I will say that detail for me is, again, like thrilling, just like the tile under the foot of the chair. You know, now I want to see the detail in the glasses. I'm intentionally framing, really intentionally. And you can see there's these little half and quarter apple boxes under the shorter parents to adjust, but I want to make sure that I did see some of a chin, some, you know, or some of the mouth. I intentionally made sure I wasn't like cutting everyone off here, because I knew if I threw in a little bit of that you would see just the power in her expression, and I'm glad we don't see it too much because it's just filtered in a little bit. And this mom, again, I thought she would be here today. She comes to every talk I do online and in person, tells me she loves me all the time, sends me emails, you know, it's like, come stay at my house. It's incredible. So, yeah.
Can I say one more thing? About 2,000 yards from here is a standalone psychiatric hospital. 175 years old. Right now, I've worked there for over 20 years, and right now, this whole thing's happening on the inpatient units. Kids are there right now. Then, it's pretty hair-raising stuff that I've been witness to, especially over the last 5 years. In locked inpatient units. So it's been so glad to be here.
Yeah.
But I have to be there.
Please, go ahead. Thank you. Yes.
Can I just say, I expected this to be confrontational, you know, and I'm reminded of, remember that series of Vietnam veterans, the photos of the Vietnam veterans, or I don't know, 350. Anyway, so I'm thinking of that, but this is This is confrontational in such a loving way that I have to thank you. It's just, thank you for doing this for our community, but for these kids, it's so loving.